Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Glenorchy City Council's second open workshop on the 5th of August 2024. As I said, this is the second of our open workshops. The Council has agreed to trial open workshops so we can share some of the information that we usually have at a workshop and take out some of the closed door atmosphere that we've had in the past. We're trying to make sure we welcome as many people and keep touch points with as many of our people in our community as we possibly can. Tonight, excuse me, we are live streaming this session and it's being recorded for future reference and access. If anyone is struggling to hear, we did realise last meeting that some people in the back row struggled to hear. It's got better hearing upstairs, or you're welcome to just come to the end of the table if you'd like, or there's a hearing loop, but if you're struggling with that, I do say please come to the front. Now, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Muanina people as the traditional owners of this land. We recognise the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original and continuing custodians of the lands and waters of this island, Glenorchy. We pay our respect to Aboriginal elders past and present, and we commit to working in a way that welcomes and respects all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, tonight we have apologies from Councillor Molly Kendall and Alderman Josh Cocksharp, but it's a great opportunity to introduce Alderman Stringer. Then we have Alderman Councillor Quick. Now we have Alderman Jan Dunsby. Oh, we have the new Deputy Mayor, Russell Yaxley. We have Patrick sitting here next to me. Patrick is going to be our guest speaker tonight, and he is going to make asset management sound sexy. So that's a big challenge. I have the General Manager sitting next to me, Tony McMullen, and then we have Alderman King and Alderman Shane Alderton.
Alderman Slade, so a late apology here.
Thank you. So, yes. Okay, so another issue that we do at when we're having a workshop that we're trialling is to give an update to everybody so that all of the aldermen are on the same page as to what's going on at the moment. So you can share that as well. We at the Council are continuing to develop a coordinated approach to antisocial behaviour and safety in our city. The Alderman and myself sent a letter to the Premier of Tasmania and ministers of relevant departments and Liberal members, which we all signed on the 31st of July. We've sent that to the Premier, and he has responded and invited myself and the General Manager to meet with him on the 23rd of August. So this is advocating for more resources to deal with these issues in the city. Our elected officials have also received a calendar invite to a business breakfast. This is for all of the small businesses and large if they want, to come along and understand their legal rights, how to keep themselves safe and their businesses safe, and what Council is doing to mitigate this safety issue and the perception that it's a much bigger issue, but it's very real if you are under attack by anyone in the community. So that will be a business breakfast to be held at the Moona Arts Centre on the 28th of August. The next one is we're going to be having a general public information session, usually called a community yarn, which we'd really love to have community involvement in. It's on the same topic, and this will be on September the 11th, where we'll have expert advice to provide people to be safe bystanders should they see a problem in our city, and if they're faced with any antisocial or criminal behaviour. These sessions will culminate in a round table discussion, again, with key decision makers such as the police and community sector organisations and not-for-profits and other stakeholders to develop a coordinated approach to the issues we're facing. And I would like to say that all cities are facing this same issue, and it's not about victimising the young people, it's about trying to find solutions to some of these problems that are going on. On Friday, the 2nd of August, we officially swore at and what did we do? Yeah, you were sworn in, that's right, thank you.
Made a declaration of office.
That's perfect, thank you. And Deputy Mayor of the Council, as I said, Russell Yaxley. So congratulations, Russell. Now, the Southern Council's Local Government Roundtable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Anita Dow, the General Manager and myself went to a meeting hosted by Anita Dow. And this one was, again, a discussion about all the challenges going on in local government. And for the different councils that attended, we were discussing the local government reform process, which seems to have come to a grinding halt, and planning reform and cultural reform. And there was time for open discussion at the meeting. And you'd be very surprised to know that we've all got the same problems. We've got too much to do with no funds. So that was that. Then there was the Glenorchy and Hobart basketball facilities meeting. So on Friday, the General Manager and I attended a meeting organised by Stuart Williamson and a number of key basketball representatives in the Hobart City Council to discuss the development of a united position on basketball facilities in Glenorchy and Hobart LGAs across business, Tasmania councils, basketball associations. It's a huge problem. Thanks to the success of the Jackies, we are finding thousands of kids in clubs with no home and desperately trying to access courts. However, Glenorchy City Council has been promised, committed with 2 letters now from the government, that we will get our 4 courts here in Glenorchy. And I commit very strongly, as I think my colleagues would agree, we are not giving those up for anything, and we're going to make sure we get them no matter what. So we're advocating at the moment for construction to start as soon as they land on the final site. Now, the next one is the pool options paper. MI Global have presented the options assessment report to the council officers for review, so we haven't seen that as yet. This will come before council in an upcoming workshop for discussion before a decision is made on the preferred option to take for development of a full concept plan and business case. But the report will be made publicly available as part of the 24th of August council meeting minutes on the 21st of August. So anyone interested in the pool, I urge you to have a look at that. Also, Glenorchy is going to be celebrating its 60th anniversary. So this is a reminder to ask our community to come and share with us any informational bits of history that they might have, because we'd like to know about it and we'd like to involve it in our ceremonies and celebrations if we can. Sadly, I have to say Ralph King and Dennis Dicky Lester. I would like to take this opportunity to remember local businessman Ralph King. Ralph owned and operated a number of successful Glenorchy businesses, including King Trailer Industries, King's Caravans and ARB 4x4 Accessories, to name a few. He employed hundreds and hundreds of people in his local businesses for many years, and I think he also sold to the mainland. Ralph was full of fun, mischief and life, and he was a very proud, hard-working man who leaves an amazing legacy. Now, Dennis Dicky Lester was a long-time employee of the council with around 40 years of service. Dicky was also a very talented footballer, first at Newtown and then at the Glenorchy Football Club, going on to represent the state, and we send our condolences to both the King and Lester families. And now, for the main act. It is my great pleasure to welcome Patrick Marshall to tell us how Council has transformed the way we manage our assets. Patrick and his team have taken an asset management system from one that was completely underfunded to an aligned one. With over $1 billion worth of assets, including roads, stormwater, parks and public buildings, it is important that they are managed efficiently and effectively to meet the needs of the community now and into the future. The success of our asset management transformation was recently acknowledged with an award at this year's International Public Works Conference. So that is big kudos for Patrick and his team. Patrick will take us through his presentation, after which there will be time for questions from elected members and also members of our community here tonight. So over to you, Patrick. I just might point out, Patrick is our Council's Manager, Assets, Engineering and Design. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thanks everyone for turning up today. It's not often people are super excited to hear about asset management, so it's a great turnout. As was mentioned, this is a presentation I gave at the IPWC earlier in Melbourne in April. So this is a bit of a different audience that was sort of aimed at asset managers and engineers. And it's kind of about getting council to buy into the importance of asset renewals. So I'll be talking about you guys as elected members. So it might seem a little bit strange, but I'll try and make it relevant. I haven't really made any changes from that. So there's a couple of things that are out of date, but I'll talk through those. And just to prove the medal's real, I brought it along, so it is real. Not quite an Olympic gold medal, but it's not too bad.
It's very impressive.
All right, so why are we interested in strategic asset management? I'm not standing today, I'm sitting here, but in the time I present this presentation to you, we'll have consumed about 1 bay or 2 bays of a concrete footpath. That's about $1,100. This presentation goes for about 25 minutes. So that's how quickly we're consuming our assets. We have about $1 billion worth of assets here at Glenorchy City Council, and it depletes at a rate of about $19 million a year. So that's a really large amount of money that we need to be funding our depreciation. To help put that into context, that's about 25% of council's operational budget goes directly to funding depreciation. And to put that into even further context, that's 43% of council's rate revenue. So for all the money we bring in for rate revenue, 43% of that goes directly into funding our depreciation. So it's a really significant cost that council needs to manage. And something we often talk about here when I'm presenting to the elected members when it comes to budget time is how important, I guess, the stewardship role is. Not just for our elected members, but for myself and other asset managers and our directors. We need to be thinking about the long term and not just about the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, but we've got to be thinking 10, 20, 30, even 40 years out, because the decisions we make today can have a really big impact into the long term. And I guess it's our role and our elected members' role to be looking after those future generations of our community and making sure we're setting them up for the best chance of success. So that's something we talk about a lot, is we've really got to make sure that we're thinking long term and not just the next few years. Why do we need to think about the long term? This is an example we sometimes like to use in asset management. It's a simple barbecue example. The reason it's important over the long term is because quite often we think, oh, that's just a barbecue. Maybe that might cost $10,000. Why don't we install a whole bunch of them in our parks and reserves? But there's a lot of other costs, hidden costs that you might not see that go along with that. And that's why it's really important that we consider those. Although that barbecue might be worth $10,000, you've got to think about what costs are associated with that over the life of that asset. Say we're going to keep that barbecue for 10 years. We've got people out there cleaning it. We've got the electricity costs that come with it. We've got the depreciation that I mentioned, as well as that initial cost of $10,000. So the annual cost to run that barbecue might be in itself $10,000. So 10 years of that barbecue, that's $110,000 just for a simple barbecue like that. So although it might not seem like a big cost to install something as simple like that, it can really start to add up. And when you're talking about $1 billion worth of assets, those numbers are really start to get really huge. Why did we need to make a change with our asset management system? We got ourselves into a situation where we were starting to have a number of deferrals when it came to renewals, and that's a really dangerous pattern to get yourself into, because what that means is, say for example we've got a road that's due for renewal and we don't do it in any given year. That has a number of impacts. First of those is we're going to have increased operation and maintenance costs. Say for a road that's got some potholes in it, if we don't replace it, we're going to have people out there filling those potholes or crack sealing it more often than we usually would. So there's a cost associated with that. We have to monitor it more often to make sure that it's not degrading any further. The renewal demand itself increases. And what I mean by that is, say we put off one job, that then has a compounding effect on the future years, because each year we're putting off another job and we just get further and further behind. That obviously leads to community dissatisfaction. No one likes to see their local roads deteriorating, full of potholes and cracks. That then damages our reputation. And probably one of the most concerning aspects is there can be real safety issues associated with that. If we have footpaths and things with trip hazards on them, someone has a fall and we know we've got an issue, we're then liable for that. So it's really important that we make sure that we're not pushing out our renewals. And that little graph there on the right, that basically just shows the longer you push it out, the more it's going to cost you to fix it in the long term. So where are we currently at? So in asset management, we quite often use a term called PVP, which stands for poor and very poor. And essentially, that's talking about when we have our assets, we rate them with a condition score, generally 1 through to 5. 1 is a brand new asset, 5 will be an asset at the end of its life. When we say poor and very poor, that's usually a condition 4 and a 5. So that's how we know how many assets we know we have to be renewing at any given time. Our average score in 2024 was about 7.8% of our assets sitting in that range. And if you compare that with the national average from the National State of the Assets report, that was at about 10%. So, okay, we're not actually sitting too bad. So that doesn't sound like we're in too bad a position. But as I say, you then got to look into the future and where are we going to end up in 30 or 40 years' time. And that's the single most important number that we need to be keeping an eye on when we're thinking long-term with our asset management. What can we do about it? Well, we have pretty limited levers to pull when it comes to generating more revenue here at council. Obviously, we've got fees and charges, but they kind of pale in significance when compared to our rate revenue. So if we want to increase our levels of service, generally that means, unfortunately, increasing our rates. And as I'm sure everyone around the table here would agree with me, that's something we never like to do because it has a real impact, particularly in times when we've got increased power, increased water, inflation's going up. So everything's increasing and council has to face those same issues too. So if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that we've got a really sound logic behind why we're going to be asking for that increased rate revenue. So the image here, unfortunately, is a little out of date now because we've had a few changes. But at the time I wrote this, that was our council. So what I'd like to talk to you about is how we've kind of embraced strategic asset management here at Glenorchy and sort of take you on the journey about how we got to where we are now. And the way we did that was by, getting buy-in from our elected members. And we did that through providing options and showing them, audio visuals on what our assets are currently looking like. So what had changed? Obviously, we've got a lot of external influences, and I did mention some of them before, but post-pandemic, we had a lot of cost escalation, and that image on the right there is a comparison from the year 2020 to the year 2021, just showing how much timber you could buy for $1,000 in each of those years. So post-pandemic, we had some really crazy cost escalations, which essentially mean we were getting less done for more. So maybe the money we had put aside to do our asset renewals would have been okay, but we've always got to keep an eye on those rates and make sure that we're budgeting for those accordingly. So that's where a gap can really quickly start to come in. So how do we set the scene? So about 3 years ago, when these gaps started to emerge, when presenting the capital budget, I came to realise that we're starting to have this gap between our asset renewal forecast. And so I made a point of making sure that was highlighted to each of our elected members. And I remember putting it in the spreadsheet in bold and in red, just so they were really clear that we were starting to have this gap between our budget and our asset management plan. What else did we do? We used photos and videos to show them what some of our assets were looking like there out in the field. I guess for myself and my team, we're out there all the time looking at these, but obviously our elected members can't be in all these locations at the same time. So I think it's really important that we try and share that information with them. That photo there is the roundabout in Renfrew Circle. And if you've been in Goodwood recently, you'll know that that's currently under construction, but really high profile road that was reaching the end of its life. Something we also did was take a trip out with the elected members recently to show you this in person, and that's something we'd probably like to do a bit more of in the future as well. So this is an example of one of the videos I shared at the time, and this is Ashbourne Grove in West Moona. That's primary school. You can see certain structures are starting to impact that road condition. There's patches all the way up it. If I just skip to the next one, this is the adjacent footpath. You can see up it, reaching the end of its life. On the right, you can see driveways are scraping, so that's starting to impact. certainly would be in condition 4 and 5 that was due for renewal. I think anyone that would see that video would realise actually, hey, we've got to do something with that asset. So what we can do is we have some software we can provide options on how much funding we want to assign to our asset management, and we can run different scenarios based on what level of service we would provide into the future. And we model that over a 30-year period, and we can see how that changes over the long term. And one thing we've also done recently is get some feedback from the community on the levels of service that we're providing and the trade-off on that versus the rates that people are willing to pay. So each year we do our future budget survey. You'll notice at the end of that, there's a whole bunch of questions around asset management, just to try and get a feel for, are we actually meeting, I guess, the community's expectations when it comes to level of service? Would people be willing to pay more rates for a better level of service, or is it the other way around? So it gives us a little bit of a feel to make sure we're in the right ballpark. So some of the options we ran. Option 1, essentially we just modelled what was currently in the long-term financial management plan over 30 years, and then we asked the question, what condition will our assets end up after those 30 years? Then we ran a couple of other scenarios. So the second one was, all right, if we want to get an average condition score of the entire network of 3, so 3 is about an average score, 1 being brand new, 5 being the end of its life, how much funding would be required over the 30 years to achieve that? Okay, if we want to go even further and get a 2.5 on average, how much funding is required? And that's what's really powerful about this modelling, is you can start to see the different impacts the increased funding can have. And one thing to try and do is to make sure we don't overcomplicate things and just use simple dashboards like these, just running through the different scenarios. So the LCC, the second column there, that's the life cycle cost. So over the 30 years, how much money we're going to spend under those 3 scenarios. The third column, EACF, is the equivalent annualised cash flow. So that's divided by the 30 years. So that's how much we're spending each year. And then the colours is just a traffic light to tell us the health of the asset. So in 2024, we were sitting at an average of 2.84. If we kept going with that first scenario, in 2054, in 30 years' time, that would have deteriorated to a 3.14, which is starting to get into a pretty bad average score. The second scenario there, that was to maintain the condition score of 3 and then the 2.5. And you can look at the second scenario there, and we only had to increase funding by $700,000. And this is roads, I should mention. I like to use roads because it's a nice linear asset and it's much easier to kind of explain. It gets a bit more complicated with things with different components like buildings and parks and reserves, so I use roads. But additional $700,000 would mean we could achieve that condition score of 3 over the 30 years' time. But then if we wanted to go further to the 2.5, then we're starting to have to cough up some bigger dollars. You know, that's nearly about 2.8 million difference. So that's significant. So what's been the game changer here for us at Glenorchy City Council? I guess through an education process and working closely with our elected members, we've now got buy-in from everyone around the table about how important asset renewals are. We always know it's really exciting to have new assets for our community, but once we get to an understanding of that, first we need to be making sure we're funding our renewals. That's a really powerful position to be in, and I think we're in a good space with that now. So obviously we've got a mayor and a deputy mayor who both understand that really well, and the elected members around the board. I've got some quotes throughout here which are from previous Mayor Beck Thomas, because that was who was here at the time. But you can see it in some of our press releases that go out. You can start to see the language around asset renewals. So our municipality and the people who live here are worth investing in. We're determined to lay a platform for that to keep happening for this term and the next. So we're not just focusing on now, we're focusing into the future as well. Now, sorry about that horrible screen grab, that's just where it starts. At the time of doing this, the previous Mayor Beck Thomas was actually running for Legislative Council, so she was unable to do an interview with me. Luckily, at the time, Deputy Mayor, now Mayor Sue Hickey, agreed to answer a few questions for me, so I'll play that video for you now.
When did you realise council needed to focus on its asset renewals? Patrick, I think it really came down to a thud in the 2022-23 budget when the elected officials realised that our plan was not going to cover the annual plan, and so that a lot of asset renewal wouldn't be happening. So then there was a lot of discussion and help from the officers, which made us realise, our obligations, which was to keep our assets in really good working condition and to make them efficient and as long lasting as we possibly could.
Why do you believe it's so important that council focuses on its asset renewals?
Well, I think one of the core things about local government is that we are asset managers. We provide a lot of the community infrastructure, such as chairs in parks and barbecues and sporting facilities. And I think it's an expectation from our ratepayers and our community that these are kept in the very best of conditions. So it is a vital part of the work we do, and it's also part of our governance and also our compliance.
What do you believe is the biggest blocker to achieving that vision?
Well, obviously, when you're trying to have enough money to build these assets or to keep them in good condition, you have to have a source of income that's generally rates. And I can assure you, elected members are not keen on just bumping up rates, and ratepayers don't like paying extra rates. So a lot of negotiation and engagement and social media posts and building up those relationships to make sure that people understand that their rates are essential for these pieces of infrastructure.
And how do we sell that vision to the community?
Well, I think also we first of all have to have all of our elected representatives on board, so they all have to buy into the message that we do have an obligation to keep our assets of a certain standard. I think nothing is worse than seeing a town or a city let its town go down by having broken chairs in parks and swings that don't work and not enough rubbish bins and things like that. So that's imperative to keep the good mood and environment, and it also has buy-in from the community. And the community will get very angry if those assets are not looked after.
And what would be your message to the Australian local government community?
Look, it's essential. It is part of our duty as local government. We're the closest here to the public. And I think also we're the ones that actually provide all of these facilities, as I've said earlier. But somehow or other, we are going to have to stop some of the cost shifting on other things that we do from other tiers of government. And we're also going to have to find novel ways of trying to find the money to keep up the infrastructure, because pretty well every town and city around Australia will be struggling with ageing infrastructure and, the cost of renewal or replacement.
Acting Mayor Sue Hickey, thank you very much for your time. No longer acting.
No, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about.
Absolutely does. So what's the strategic asset management approach? So the historical capital planning or budgeting approach, previously we had that gap between our long-term financial management plan and our asset management plan. We didn't have that consequence analysis for our poor and very poor. So what I mean there is we not necessarily looking for the 30 and 40 years ahead to what our decision making was meaning. And we had a single scenario budget. So essentially there was a budget and it's a yes or no answer. There wasn't a lot of to and fro on how the different makeup of those asset renewals. So where are we at now? Our asset management plan fully informs our long-term financial plan. So the dollars that are in our asset management plan get fed directly into those. So there's no gap. Those two match entirely. Our budgets are set on those levels of service that we've spoken to the community about. And we can manage that poor and very poor through those different scenarios that we run. So we've got options. So what's changed? So that image there, that's Ashbourne Grove where I showed you that video before. So that's now undergone, well, the first stage, a complete asset renewal. So there's new concrete footpath both sides of the road, new curb and channel, and a deep lift asphalt pavement for the entire length. And the remaining segment will be done this financial year. So by collaborating closely with our elected members, we've had a really significant shift in the investment in our asset renewals. And the two budgets following that have completely removed that funding gap. So we have no more gaps between our long-term financial management plan and our asset management plan. Another quote here I like to include is, it's our responsibility to current and future generations of Glenorchy to make sure council is financially sustainable. We'll do that through a targeted review of services, maintaining and renewing our assets. So again, really powerful language by our leaders here at Glenorchy. So now we have control of our poor and very poor. We know what that's going to look like in 10, 20 and 30 years' time. And as I said, our long-term financial plan matches our asset management plan. We don't have those gaps and we don't have that renewal demand increasing any further. Therefore, we've reduced our risk from that slide I showed earlier. And we're maintaining assets into the long term at a level of service that should be acceptable to the community based on the feedback we're getting. And those service levels are now in our DNA. So when we start talking about budgets, we talk about, okay, what level of service do we want to be providing?
So Patrick, can I just ask where you are there in that photo?
That's Cousins Road on the way out off Collinsvale Road. Here. So now we're focused on renewals first, and as an asset manager, that's something I always harp on about. Yes, we love the shiny new assets, but they are the things that have to come after we've funded our asset renewals. They're the most important and critical thing when it comes to council's assets and making sure we're maintaining those to an acceptable level. And therefore, that means that our renewal funding had to increase. It's now needs-based, which has resulted in some increased rates, as I'm sure you're all aware of, but we know that's now an informed decision and we know why we needed to increase rates. And one of the pleasing things for myself is we can see that that's really improved our condition profile of our assets, even in a really short period of time, and I'll show you that in a couple of slides. And when we'll be able to assess in the future, if we're in a better financial position, we may have more money to be able to increase the level of service that we're providing, and then we do start to have the money to spend on some of those more nice to have things. So this graph here, the first set of charts on the left is from the year 2019, and this is a condition inspection that we've had done for all of our footpaths in our municipality, and we get that done every 4 years. And the reason I show this is in 2019, we were spending about $1.1 million renewing our footpaths every year. Fast forward to 2023 and we doubled that to $2.2 million. But the pleasing thing is, if you look at the red and the black bars on those charts, that's our poor and very poor. So condition 4 and 5, assets reaching the end of their life. So in 2019, we were sitting at about 16% condition 4 and 10% condition 5. And even in those 4 years, we've brought that down to 9.5% for condition 4 and 6%. So that's really powerful data that I can, come back to the table with to say actually the investment that we're making is having a really big difference. And let's wait another 4 years and see where that chart's starting to get to. So you can really see the impacts on the ground. So what does the future look like? One of the things we've done here at council is we have asset management plans for all our major asset classes, that is transport, stormwater, buildings and parks and reserves. And traditionally they've been a big hard copy document with a lot of data in them that actually probably don't get looked at by that many people apart from myself and a few other people. What we've done now is this is now a digital asset management plan and all the data in it is live. So as soon as we have new data about increased rates or new condition data, that goes straight in and the whole thing will just update automatically. So we now have a live living asset management plan. We still have our strategic asset management plan that needs to get endorsed by council every 4 years, but our individual plans, they update and they're a live living document. And I think that's probably going to be the way of the future. So as Warren Buffett said, always make sure we're investing for the long term. So that's my presentation on the journey we've gone through here at Glenorchy City Council, and thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you.
What was that award again Patrick received for that?
Who stole it?
It's gone here.
Oh, come back.
The
Okay.
EJ Ted Hooper Award for the best presentation at the International Public Press Conference.
And how many people were there? How many people were competing against?
About 900 delegates. And
Out of 900 delegates, we got first. You got first.
Presentations, 3 days of presentations, 3 streams. I don't actually know how many, but
Too many.
about 100, I'd say. Yeah.
So well done. Thank you.
Yes.
Tremendous effort.
Patrick, from memory, after you came back, there was an American visiting a gentleman who came here, and he'd been to the same conference, and he spoke about how important this was and how much better off we were than America because of the investment we were making in asset management. So you have made it sexy. Who knew that a footpath or a road could be so important? But it is to anyone who has to use them. So the importance of these workshops is to share this knowledge. This is exactly the same information we get in a workshop. And the only reason we have the other workshops is because they're not decision-making forums, and sometimes there is confidential information about like a company we're dealing with or information like that. We want to open as many as we possibly can. Now, that's where we need your help. If you can encourage as many people to come and attend or to watch it online if they're not able to get here, we need to show that this trial is working, and then hopefully this will be an example for all the other councils to be more open with their communities. So Patrick, I can't thank you enough. It's such a great thing to be able to highlight the work of our officers, and you can all hear the pride he has in his work and your team. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to open it up to questions from the Alderman, and then we're going to take any questions from anyone in our audience. Thank you, Councillor King.
You mentioned the PVP 7.8.
Quick.
What would you be happy with in the long term?
I think if we could keep it under that 10% in the 30 years' time, that would be the aim. So as I said, we're sitting pretty good at the moment, but if we had kept funding at the level we were, that would have deteriorated. So yeah, I think if we can keep it under that 10%, it'd be good.
My apologies, that was Councillor Quick. Right, thank you, Alderman Alderton.
Thank you, Mayor. Patrick, in regards to, we spend a lot of money on roads and on bitumen. So where is council at in regards to using newer bitumen technologies? Like there's a lot of products out there now using recycled glass, recycled rubber, which takes that out of the environment, which has got to be a benefit for council in other areas and create cost savings in other areas. I'm not too sure. Have you looked into what the life of those types of products are, whether it's a benefit for us to be using them because we may get a longer life out of the road service, whether it's cheaper or dearer? Have you explored that in any great detail?
We have, and we have got a few examples of those out in the community where we've used recycled glass in a few of our pavements. And the crumb rubber is the other one, as you mentioned, that's quite popular. One of the problems is, though, when we use a usual asphalt seal, when we take that up, we can then reuse that as millings for other areas, but when it's got the rubber or the glass in it, it's harder to reuse. So yes, there can be some environmental benefits, but further down the line, it's harder to reuse for something else. We have got a few trials out there, and I guess there's still a lot of data being captured on how those perform in the long term because they haven't been installed for that long. So we're trialling a few of them, but we haven't committed strongly to any of them.
So the jury's still out on whether they're going to be a cost-saving benefit to councils or an impost and a greater cost.
Yeah, correct.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
I guess around the road, in terms of the lifespan of a road, average road that we have, what lifespan are we looking at for a road, footpath, those,
Yeah,
10 years, 100 years?
Concrete footpaths and curb and channel, we should be getting about 100 years out of.
Yep.
Road surface, not quite as long, but we should be getting, if it's a new road, about 60 years at least out of it.
Yep, so
Yeah.
it'll be a lifetime.
Yeah, so, Ashbourne Grove that we've just built there, that'll be hopefully sitting there for 100 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're trying to maintain these things for multi-generations.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, anyone else? No, thank you. Is there anyone from our audience who'd like to ask a question? Thank you. Can I have your name? Lisa?
Tasmania's having such a high disability rate. How are you interpreting that into your asset management to ensure that, given the future that from now into the future, that assets are more disability friendly and more accessible to the disabled community?
Sure. So when it comes to our footpath renewal program, any time that we're coming to an intersection and there's not a set of curb routes there, generally we'll make sure we always put those in, provided we can make those meet with standards. There's some areas where we just can't because the grades just won't allow us to do that. And it probably would be going against legislation to do so. But certainly when we have the opportunity, when we renew footpaths, we'll be putting additional curb ramps in. Yep.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question around that? Do you also work with other providers, like Test Networks, for instance, put in poles and things like that? I know there's a new stretch of footpaths being put in Mona. right in the middle of it are the power poles, the light poles, which are going to inhibit people getting past. So,
And that's what the other thing I was going to add, a lot of the footpaths are too narrow for wheelchairs.
yeah,
Yeah, so when we come to replace our footpaths, we have a hierarchy based on their location. So more central, more highly used will have a wider footpath. So if the current footpath doesn't meet that, we'll make a wider footpath at the time. When it comes to TAS networks, that's a little bit more difficult. They are not, how do I say it? They don't particularly come to the party when it comes to relocating their power poles, and they'll quite often try and put that cost onto council, and it can be significant, generally $20,000 to shift one power pole. So the choice is either we cough that money up, or we maybe do a diversion around the power pole. But
so they don't consult with you if there's an opportunity to move, or if we're doing that, you can't consult with them at the time if they may be renewing it already.
Yeah, we can ask
So
the question, but
yeah.
essentially if their pole is serviceable, they don't see the need to
I
move
thought
that at
that
the
might be
time.
the case. It just makes it difficult to make it access friendly for the future when we've put down a path that's going to last 100 years.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good point.
Any other questions from our audience? No? Can I ask, did you find this particular council workshop of value? Yes? Good, good. And would you look forward to coming to other workshops? Yeah, that's great. All right, well then I'm going to ask you all to tell all your friends and neighbours, etc., that they're most welcome to join us into the future. If there are no other questions, we'll have an early 15 minutes, but it's been a real pleasure to be able to open these workshops and share them with our community. And I hope they go on for a long, long time, not just a 6 months trial. So on behalf of all the elected officials, thank you very much for coming in person, and also for our viewers online. Thank you, and I'll say good night.